He walked into class like any other day, quiet, eyes down, backpack worn and fraying at the edges. But that morning, something was different. He wasn't carrying a tablet or a crisp new textbook like the other kids. Instead, clutched to his chest was an old, torn book. Its spine was broken, the pages curled and yellowing like something pulled from a forgotten attic. And when his teacher saw it, really saw it, everything stopped. Her smile faded. Her hands trembled. Then she opened it, and tears filled her eyes. No one in that classroom could understand why, except for her. Now you're here, trying to find out what made a seasoned, composed teacher break down over a battered book in the hands of a quiet little boy. I promise you're going to get the answer. But first, you need to see what was hidden inside that book. Something powerful enough to unravel years of silence, stir memories long buried, and shake the very foundation of a teacher's heart. Now, let's slow down for a second. Because this isn't just about a book. This is about you. About the things we carry. Torn memories, broken connections, the moments that never made sense until something unexpected brings them crashing back. You ever stumble across something small, a photo, a note, even a smell, that instantly pulls you back to a time you thought you'd forgotten? That's what happened in this classroom. That's the kind of emotional gut punch we're walking into. But I want to make something very clear. This isn't just another sad story online. This is something much deeper. This is the kind of story that changes how you see people, the quiet ones, the struggling ones, the ones who walk and just trying to make it through the day without drawing too much attention. Because sometimes they're carrying more than we realize. Sometimes they're holding the key to someone else's healing. So don't just watch this video. Feel it. Stay with me. I know how easy it is to click away, especially when your phone is buzzing or another video's flashing something dramatic in the sidebar. But what if the best story you'll hear all week, the one that stays with you long after the screen goes dark, is the one you're watching right now? I've built this entire video to draw you in and guide you toward the moment that brings everything full circle. There's a twist coming you won't expect. And I don't just want you to hear it. I want you to live it. Because by the end, you're not just going to understand why that teacher cried. You're going to feel why she cried. You're going to remember someone from your own life. Maybe a teacher. Maybe a friend. Maybe even yourself. The boy's name is Mason. 10 years old. Soft-spoken, with a mop of sandy hair and eyes that hold more than any child should. He's one of those kids who slips under the radar, not loud, not troublesome, just there. The kind of student who finishes his work quietly, never asks for more, never complains. Most days, no one notices when he enters or leaves. But Mrs. Callahan does. She's been teaching third grade for over 20 years, and she's seen all types: loud, shy, troubled, gifted. She thought she'd seen it all. Until Mason brought in that book. Until the day something seemingly small shattered her composure in front of the whole class. And if you've ever been in a classroom, you know that teachers don't just cry. Not in front of kids. Not unless something real hits them. Now you're probably wondering, what was in the book? What did Mason know? Was this planned? Did he mean to bring that reaction out of her? Or was he just a kid bringing something he found on his bedroom floor, unaware of the storm it would unleash? That's what we're going to unpack together. And trust me when I say, you're going to want to see every second of it. Because this isn't just about a book. It's about a secret, a connection, a full circle moment years in the making. You'll see how pain passed from one person to another can be the very thing that brings them back together. You'll see how one act, one small, silent act, can carry a story heavier than any words. The atmosphere in that classroom changed the moment Mason handed her the book. And the students felt it.
Kids are intuitive that way.
They may not understand the details, but they feel the shift in energy. The way their teacher froze. The way her fingers hovered over the first page like it might burn her to touch it. And then she opened it. That's when it hit her. And for the first time in all her years of teaching, she couldn't find the words to continue. She just stood there, staring. Then her voice cracked. Her knees wobbled. And finally, the tears came, slow, but unstoppable. The class was silent. Mason just stood there, watching her. Not surprised. not confused, just waiting. That moment, right there, is where everything you thought you knew about this story flips upside down. Because this wasn't just some random book. It wasn't just old or damaged. It was something else entirely. And once you realize what she saw, once you understand the truth hiding between those pages, you'll feel it too. You'll feel that lump in your throat, that twinge in your chest. Because at its core, this story is about recognition. About the moments in life when time folds in on itself and reminds you that some wounds never fully heal, but they can be reopened in the most unexpected, meaningful ways. So here's the deal. Don't go anywhere. If you're watching this on your lunch break, just know it's going to stay with you far longer than your sandwich. If you're scrolling through TikTok or YouTube Shorts looking for something to make you feel something real, this is it. This is the one. I'm not just telling you a story. I'm pulling you into a mystery you won't be able to walk away from. Not until you know what was written in that book. Not until you see what it did to her. Not until you realize how one boy, one quiet little boy, managed to reach into a teacher's past and change her future. Because here's what you don't know yet. This book didn't belong to Mason. And it wasn't supposed to be in his hands. It came from somewhere else. Someone else. Someone with a history that connects directly to Mrs. Callahan in a way that will leave you stunned. That's what makes this moment so powerful. That's what makes her reactions so heartbreaking. And that's what makes you, yes, you, stay with me until the very last second of this video. Because I promise you, when you see what happens next, you'll understand why this story had to be told. And you'll be glad you stayed. So go ahead. Lean in. Because in the next moment, when Mrs. Callahan finally speaks, she doesn't just explain what's in the book. She reveals a truth that no one in that room, especially Mason, was ready for. And that is where everything changes. The room sat in heavy silence as Mrs. Callahan stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the open pages in her hands. Mason, still standing at the front of the classroom, shifted his weight slightly, but his expression didn't change. There was no fear, no confusion, just a quiet patience, like he already knew this moment was coming. Behind him, his classmates fidgeted in their seats, unsure whether to whisper or watch or wait for the usual rhythm of the school day to return. But nothing felt usual anymore. Something about the way Mrs. Callahan held that book, like it had stopped time for her, kept everyone frozen.
To them, it was just a damaged book.
But to her, it was the beginning of something buried. And no one, not even Mason, could have predicted what would come next. What's strange is that until this day, Mason had never done anything out of the ordinary. He was a quiet kid, not shy exactly, but reserved. He always turned in his homework on time, kept to himself during recess, and never caused trouble. Some teachers might have overlooked him entirely, but Mrs. Callahan had a soft spot for the quiet ones. Maybe because she used to be one of them. She noticed how Mason always sat in the same spot, never made eye contact when answering questions, and kept his head low when other students laughed too loudly. There was a sadness in him, but the kind you couldn't name. The kind you only recognized when you'd carried it yourself. Just a week before the book incident, something had shifted. Mason had started showing up earlier than usual. He'd sit at his desk before the first bell, scribbling in a notebook he never let anyone see. He'd begun to avoid lunchtime, choosing instead to sit by the window in the library. Mrs. Callahan had noticed the change, but with so many students and so little time, it was easy to convince herself that maybe he was just going through a phase.
Kids did that sometimes.
They'd retreat into their own little worlds and resurface days later, like nothing happened. But Mason's world seemed heavier. Like something had entered it. Something too big for a 10-year-old to carry alone. Some of the other kids had noticed too. Tyler, the class clown, started saying Mason was creepy because he talked to himself under his breath when he thought no one was listening. Kayla said she saw Mason digging in the school garden alone, even though there weren't any assignments out there. And then there was the day Mrs. Callahan found a note on her desk. No name, just a few jagged words on torn notebook paper. It's not just a book. At the time, she thought maybe one of her students had been trying to be creative, maybe a writing prompt gone rogue. But now, With the torn book in her hands and Mason's unwavering gaze on her face, that note didn't feel like a game anymore. It felt like a warning. Digging into Mason's recent history only deepens the puzzle. His mother, a nurse working double shifts, had been barely visible at parent conferences. His father hadn't been seen at all. Rumor around the faculty room said Mason's dad left 2 years ago after some kind of legal trouble. The school counselor had tried reaching out, but every time she scheduled a meeting, Mason would politely decline. "I'm fine," he'd say, always with that calm, careful voice, like he'd rehearsed it 100 times before. But Mason wasn't fine. Something was unraveling around him, and the book was the first piece to slip through the cracks. The book itself wasn't part of any school curriculum. Mrs. Callahan knew that instantly. The cover was too old, the style outdated. Yet something about it felt familiar, eerily so. The moment she touched the first page, something inside her jolted. Like recognition before memory. There was handwriting in the margins. Faded, but unmistakable. Not a child's scribble, an adult's. The words weren't lessons or notes. They were personal. They told pieces of a story. Names, dates, fragments of thoughts. And then she saw it, her name. Not Mrs. Callahan, but her real name. The name she hadn't used since college. Written in a slanted scrawl she hadn't seen in years. Her stomach dropped. She didn't say a word, but her knees nearly gave out. Why would this book, her book, be in Mason's hands? As she stared at the pages, a cold thought crept in. There were only a handful of people who knew that name, and fewer still who knew about that chapter of her life, the one she'd worked so hard to forget. One of them was someone she'd lost touch with a long time ago. Someone who disappeared without explanation, leaving behind only a trail of questions and unfinished conversations. She never imagined she'd hear from him again. But now maybe she had. Could it be? Could Mason be connected to him? There were other possibilities. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe the book came from a thrift shop or a yard sale. But as she flipped through the pages and read more of the notes, personal, intimate, emotional, coincidence felt impossible. Someone wanted her to see this. Someone knew where she taught. Someone placed that book in Mason's hands knowing it would get to her. But why Mason? Why now? Then another possibility struck her. What if Mason wasn't just a messenger, but a part of the message? What if he wasn't just holding the book, but had a reason for doing it? Was he sent by someone? Did he know what the book meant? That's when things got darker. Because if someone had involved this child in a years-old personal secret, one she never spoke of, not even to her family, then something much bigger was going on. And she wasn't sure who to trust. Meanwhile, the students began whispering after class. Mason became the center of hushed gossip. Some said he was cursed. Others said the book was haunted. A few believed he was a genius hiding something brilliant. But the truth was more tangled than any of them could guess. Because this wasn't just about a mysterious old book. It was about identity, loss, and the kind of pain that doesn't go away just because time keeps moving. It was about connections that refuse to die, no matter how hard we try to bury them. And as the school week moved forward, strange things began happening. A teacher reported seeing someone standing outside the classroom window after hours, someone who vanished before security could arrive. A janitor found the same note. It's not just a book, scribbled on a whiteboard that hadn't been used in weeks. And then, late one evening, Mrs. Callahan returned to her classroom and found something that made her heart race, an old photo on her desk. Faded, torn at the edges. A picture of her, much younger, standing next to someone she never thought she'd see again. The back had one word written in ink. Remember. Now the pieces were falling into place, but they weren't forming a clear picture. If anything, the more she learned, the more questions she had. Mason's behavior, the book, the notes, the photo, none of it added up in a neat, understandable way. And maybe that was the point. Maybe someone wanted her to feel unsettled, to start asking questions. Maybe someone was pulling strings from behind the curtain, watching her reactions, waiting for her to follow the trail. But what trail? What exactly was she supposed to find? That's what we're about to discover. Because Mason didn't bring the book by accident. He didn't find it lying around. Someone gave it to him. Someone who knew exactly what it would do. And that someone might be closer than anyone realizes. The next morning, Mrs. Callahan arrived early to school, hoping to be alone in the classroom before the rush of students filled the halls. She needed a few quiet minutes to examine the book again, to confirm what she had seen the day before hadn't been some hallucination brought on by lack of sleep or creeping stress. But when she opened the bottom drawer of her desk, where she'd carefully hidden the book beneath a stack of test papers, it was gone. Not misplaced. Not buried under the wrong pile.
Gone.
The drawer was untouched, nothing out of place, no sign of forced entry. And just like that, the one object that had cracked open this strange mystery had vanished without a trace. Her heart pounded as she rifled through every drawer, searched under desks, checked the storage closet, everywhere it could have possibly slipped. But it was nowhere. The only thing she found was a small yellow sticky note stuck to the inside of her desk drawer, one that definitely hadn't been there the night before. There were only 2 words written in thick, black ink. Stop digging. She stared at it, chilled to the bone. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't something a student would do for fun. Whoever left this message knew what the book meant to her, and they were watching close enough to know she'd be back to look for it. The implications were terrifying. Not only had someone broken into her private space, they'd done it without leaving a trace and with perfect timing. It wasn't random. It was calculated. Mason arrived quietly, just as he always did, but today he wouldn't meet her eyes. When she tried to ask him about the book, he acted confused. Not like a child pretending, but like someone who had been told not to talk. Something in his body language had changed overnight. He looked smaller somehow, more guarded. She asked him gently where the book had come from, who gave it to him. But Mason only mumbled something about not remembering. And then, as if it had slipped out by accident, he said, "He told me not to say anything." She leaned in, trying to hide the urgency in her voice. "Who told you that, Mason?" But his face froze. He clammed up, eyes darting toward the classroom door. He wouldn't say another word. That same day, she went to the school's security office to ask about any camera footage from the night before. If someone had broken into her classroom, maybe the hallway cameras had caught something. But when the security officer pulled up the file for the previous night, the footage was missing. Not blank. Deleted. The file had been wiped clean from the system. Only that one night, that one hallway. Everything before and after was intact. The officer looked confused, but offered no explanation. "Could be a glitch," he shrugged. But she didn't believe that for a second. Too many things were lining up in just the wrong way. It wasn't a glitch. Someone wanted this hidden. And that's when she decided to go beyond the school for answers. She drove across town that afternoon to an old friend she hadn't seen in nearly a decade, Robert Fells, a retired private investigator who'd once helped her through a very different kind of crisis. He was grizzled now, slower than before, but sharp as ever. When she told him what was happening, he didn't question her sanity. Instead, he leaned back, crossed his arms, and asked the one question that had been hovering in her mind since this all began. Who would go through this much trouble to get to you after all these years? She hesitated, then told him about Marcus, the man from her past who had vanished without warning, who knew things about her no one else did. The one who wrote in that very same handwriting. They'd been close once. Too close. And when things fell apart, he left town, cut contact, disappeared like a ghost. For years, she convinced herself he was just gone. But if he was back, if he had found Mason somehow. Robert frowned. "You ever tell anyone at this school about Marcus?" She shook her head. "No one." Then someone else did. That's when the betrayal surfaced. Robert made a few quiet calls and returned with something that made her stomach drop. Someone had recently filed a background check request using her full legal name, the one from her college records. It wasn't a random check. It had come from a name she recognized painfully well, Lauren Bishop. A former friend. A colleague. Someone who knew exactly what to look for and had every reason to reopen wounds long since closed. They hadn't spoken in years. Not since that night they argued at a faculty retreat and never spoke again. But apparently, Lauren hadn't forgotten. and she had access. Back at the school, Mrs. Callahan noticed Lauren had been unusually friendly lately, stopping by her classroom more than usual, offering to help with student evaluations, asking casual questions that didn't seem so casual anymore. It all clicked. Lauren had found the old story. She dug up Marcus's name, maybe even tracked down where he'd been. But why involve a child? Why drag Mason into it? Unless Mason wasn't just a pawn. Unless Mason was connected to Marcus in a way no one expected. That theory grew louder in her head later that night when she received an anonymous email. No subject line. No name. Just a photo attachment. It was grainy and low resolution, clearly taken with an old camera, but unmistakable. Marcus, standing outside what looked like a hospital, holding the hand of a boy no older than 5. The timestamp read 7 years ago. And standing beside him, blurred in the background, but unmistakably visible, was Lauren. Now nothing made sense anymore. Why would Lauren be with Marcus after all those years? What was the connection between them? And more importantly, what did any of this have to do with Mason? She picked up her phone to call Robert and tell him what she'd found. But just before she could dial, the screen lit up with a message she didn't recognize. No name. Just 4 words. Don't trust the boy. The message hit her like a brick wall. Don't trust the boy. It sounded impossible. Mason, the quiet, withdrawn child who never raised his voice, who handed her a torn book like it was the only thing he had in the world. That Mason? The very idea felt cruel. But even as she stared at the message, her hands trembling and her gut twisting, a small voice at the back of her mind whispered something she didn't want to hear. What if you've been looking at this all wrong? While Mrs. Callahan tried to process the eerie message, miles away across the city, someone else received something almost identical. Robert Fells had just finished his evening walk when he returned home to find an envelope taped to his front door. No postage, no markings, just his name scrawled in the same blunt, black ink he'd seen in that photo from Mrs. Callahan. He brought it inside, peeled it open carefully, and unfolded a single sheet of paper. This time, the message was shorter, but somehow more chilling. You're in this now. Walk away. And beneath it, paper clipped to the note, was a photocopy of a hospital intake form from over 7 years ago. The patient's name, Mason W. Callahan. Robert's eyebrows furrowed. Mason had Mrs. Callahan's last name? Was it a coincidence, or had she lied to him about not knowing the boy's background? Without waiting for morning, Robert called her. When she answered, her voice was tight, on edge. I got another message, she whispered before he could speak. Me too, he replied grimly. He told her about the hospital form. When she heard the name, she stopped breathing for a second. That's not possible, she said softly, but even she didn't sound convinced. He's not related to me. I would have known. There's no way, her voice trailed off, as if her mind had already begun spiraling through all the possibilities. The next day at school, a new element deepened the puzzle. One of the custodians, Mr. Benning, a quiet man who mostly kept to himself, approached her in the hallway, eyes darting nervously like he was trying not to be seen. He slipped her a small folded piece of notebook paper and whispered, I found this behind your desk last night. Thought you should see it before anyone else. Before she could ask anything, he walked away quickly. When she unfolded the note, she expected another threat. But this wasn't a warning. It was a page ripped from a student's diary. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, clearly a child's. At the top, in big letters, was the word secrets. She scanned the writing. It was disjointed and rambling, the kind of thing a child might write when scared and alone. But one sentence stood out, burned into her mind as she read it again and again. He says I'm supposed to lie about who I am, even to her. But I wish I could tell her the truth. I think she's kind, but he said she'd ruin everything. There was no name, but she didn't need one. She recognized the shape of the letters, the way certain words were spelled. It was Mason's. Now, the entire narrative was cracking open. Mason had been told to lie. He was involved, not by choice but by control. Someone had gotten to him, someone who'd planted him here, told him exactly what to do, what to say. That someone might have been Marcus. Or worse, Lauren. And suddenly, that innocent little boy didn't look so untouched anymore. He looked like the center of a very dark plan. But why her? Why was she the target? What did she have to do with this? Robert dug deeper that afternoon and found something even stranger. Records from the same hospital that had Mason's intake form also showed a birth certificate that had been altered, digitally tampered with. The original name of the mother was blacked out. But when Robert examined the metadata of the scan, a faded name tag still clung to the bottom margin: Amelia Callahan. Mrs. Callahan's full name. He called her immediately. "You ever spend any time at Rosefield Hospital about 7 years ago?" There was a long pause on the other end. No. I mean, maybe once when I visited a friend who had a baby, but I wasn't admitted or anything." He pressed further. "Did you ever sign anything? Fill out forms on their computer?" She faltered. "Maybe. I don't remember." But even she could hear how thin her voice sounded. If the metadata was correct, then someone had used her identity for something, possibly to claim a child or forge a paper trail. And now that child was in her classroom, being watched by someone, manipulated like a chess piece, and used to unlock a past she didn't even know she was connected to. The last thread unraveled that night when Mrs. Callahan received another anonymous email, this time with a video. It had no sound, just footage of her classroom, clearly taken with a hidden camera, showing her opening the torn book for the first time, then crying. It was a moment she thought was private, something that only happened between her and Mason. But someone had been watching the entire time. And at the end of the clip, just before the video cut out, the camera shifted ever so slightly, revealing a reflection in the glass window near the classroom door. It was Lauren. She had been there the entire time. But why hadn't she stepped in? Why record that moment? And just when she thought she couldn't feel any more violated, another detail struck her. The timestamp on the footage was 2 hours before school had even opened that day, meaning the camera had already been recording, ready, waiting. None of this was accidental. It was staged. Every beat of it. As she sat frozen, processing the horror of that realization, her phone buzzed once again. Another message. This one read, "If you want to know who Mason really is, look in the basement." She didn't even know which basement it meant. Hers, the school's, someone else's. But something in her gut told her the next clue wouldn't just shake her world. It would shatter it. Mrs. Callahan couldn't sleep that night. The video, the diary entry, the email, all of it swirled in her mind like a storm she couldn't escape. Even with the lights on in every room of her house, the darkness felt close, thick, pressing in on her skin. She tried to calm herself, telling her mind it was probably a hoax, a cruel trick by someone with too much time. But deep down, she knew better. This wasn't random. Someone was targeting her, and Mason was the key to it all. The message had said to check the basement. But which one? She had paced for hours, debating whether to check her own or wait until morning to search the school. At 2:14 a.m., unable to wait any longer, she grabbed a flashlight and headed to her basement, the one place in her home she never used, never liked, and for good reason. The air down there was always musty and still, like time had stopped moving. Her late husband used to keep old furniture down there, but after he passed, she'd avoided it altogether. That night, she wished she had kept it locked forever. The moment she stepped onto the creaking wooden steps, a wave of cold air hit her chest. Her flashlight flickered once, then steadied. With every creak beneath her feet, her pulse climbed higher. She wasn't sure what she expected to find. Dust, boxes, maybe an old toy Mason had somehow lost during a long-forgotten visit? But as the beam of her flashlight passed across the cement wall at the far end, something caught her eye, something new. A thin wooden board, freshly nailed, covering what looked like a sealed vent. Her heart slammed against her ribcage as she stepped closer. On the board was a handwritten word, burned into the wood with some kind of soldering iron. Liar. She froze. No one knew about this space. No one had a key to the side door but her. She backed away slowly, her breath catching, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Then she heard it. A slow creak, not from her, but from above. The floorboards right over the basement stairs. Someone was in the house. She didn't have time to think. She shut off her flashlight and backed into the shadows. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She could hear soft, deliberate footsteps upstairs, methodical, like someone who already knew the layout. She pressed her hand to her mouth, biting the skin of her knuckles to keep from gasping. Whoever it was didn't speak, didn't turn on any lights. They moved directly toward her bedroom and paused. She could hear the quiet creak of her nightstand drawer opening. That's where she had kept the diary page. They were searching for something, maybe trying to retrieve it, maybe looking for more. Either way, it confirmed her worst fear. This wasn't about scaring her. This was about control. The intruder left minutes later, and she waited a full hour before daring to move. By the time the sun rose, she had packed a bag and drove straight to Robert's apartment. She didn't even knock, just banged on the door until he opened it, his face still half asleep. The moment she stepped inside, she collapsed onto the floor, shaking. He gave her tea, tried to calm her down, but she couldn't stop crying. "Someone was in my house," she said. "They knew where I kept the note. They walked right into my bedroom like they belonged there." Robert paled. "You need to go to the police," he whispered, but even he didn't sound convinced that would solve anything. "I tried," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But they said unless something was taken or I had proof, they couldn't do anything." That's when Robert told her something that made her blood turn cold. "I went back to the hospital records," he said. "Tried to trace the file number connected to Mason's intake. But the file isn't there anymore. It was removed from the database." She blinked. "How's that even possible?" Robert hesitated. "I asked around. One of my old contacts told me that when records vanish like that, completely gone from both physical and digital, it's usually not an accident. It means someone with real access scrubbed it." Mrs. Callahan's eyes widened. "Someone high up?" He nodded. "Or someone working for someone high up." And that's when she realized the truth she'd been avoiding all along. This wasn't just a strange student with a torn book. This was bigger. Much bigger. Someone didn't want Mason's past to be known. Someone had gone to great lengths to place him in her classroom, to erase his real identity, to set this chain of events in motion. And now they were watching her, breaking into her home, threatening her, deleting records. Before they could say anything else, Robert's phone buzzed. He looked down and frowned. "It's from Lauren," he said. She'd just sent a text saying, "Don't trust her either." Mrs. Callahan's eyes darted to his. "Don't trust who?" Robert turned the phone toward her. Attached to the message was a photo, grainy, like it had been taken from a distance, maybe through a window. In the image, Mrs. Callahan was sitting at a table across from someone. The problem was, she didn't remember that meeting. The photo looked recent. It was her, yes, but the expression on her face was off. Almost like she was drugged or sleepwalking. "I don't remember this," she whispered. "I swear to you, I've never met this person in my life." Robert studied the figure sitting across from her. "Wait, that's the caseworker from Mason's file. The one who signed off on his school transfer. But that person had reportedly died in a car crash months ago. So how was she in the photo, alive?" Now the line between what was real and what wasn't began to dissolve. If someone could fake records, plant children, erase government files, and fabricate memories, what else were they capable of? And then, the worst realization of all dawned on her. What if Mason wasn't the only child? Mrs. Callahan sat in her car outside the school, the engine idling as her thoughts spiraled out of control. The photograph, the deleted records, the late-night intruder, and now the mysterious text from Lauren. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle someone didn't want her to complete. She'd spent her whole life teaching children to look deeper, to question the obvious, to find meaning between the lines. And yet, here she was, standing at the edge of a mystery that refused to follow any rules. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the torn book Mason had brought that day. She hadn't looked at it since the incident, too afraid to see what it might still hold. But something urged her now, a nagging feeling that the answer, at least part of it, had been in her hands all along. She flipped through the pages, more carefully this time, searching not just for words but for anything unusual, a fold, a stain, a symbol. Then, between pages 97 and 98, she noticed a small bulge in the spine. Pressing her thumb into it, she felt the paper give slightly, and then pop free. A tiny slip of paper, no bigger than a fortune from a cookie, fell into her lap. The ink was faded, written in careful, precise cursive. Sins hidden in kindness still burn. She blinked at it, her breath catching. The handwriting was a Mason's. It wasn't a child's at all. She knew that handwriting. Her chest tightened. It was from someone she'd worked with decades ago, a teacher named Edward Green, a quiet, odd man who had vanished from the district nearly 20 years earlier after rumors swirled about his sudden departure. No one knew why he left, only that he never taught again. Most people forgot about him entirely, but not her. He'd once given her the exact same note during a staff meeting, slipped silently under her notepad when no one was looking. Back then, she thought it was some cryptic joke. Now, she wasn't so sure. Heart-pounding, she drove straight to the district archives, a cold, windowless building behind the main board office that hadn't been updated since the 90s. She flashed her credentials, asked for the old employee files from 2003, and began digging. Hours passed as she combed through paper folders and yellowing documents. When she finally found Edward Green's file, something immediately fell off. The folder was thick, too thick for someone who'd only taught a few years. Inside were reports, internal memos, even letters from parents, and at the bottom, an incident report dated March 2003. The student's name was blacked out, but the description made her blood run cold. Student demonstrated signs of trauma after discovering staff member entering records room after hours. Claimed teacher was hiding books and removing student files. Child placed in temporary care pending investigation. Case closed with no charges filed. It was signed by someone she hadn't seen in years. And then she saw it, the caseworker's name. It was Lauren. The same Lauren who sent the warning text. The same Lauren who'd supposedly gone into early retirement after her mental health declined. Mrs. Callahan's stomach turned. She had known Lauren well. They'd worked on several student assessments together. But if Lauren had been part of the system that placed Mason here, and she was now sending cryptic warnings that meant something far more disturbing, Lauren was trying to fix something, undo something. And the case from 2003, whatever had happened back then, was the blueprint for it all. Mrs. Callahan left the archives shaken, gripping her steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She didn't go home. Instead, she drove to the city's mental health facility, where she remembered Lauren had been admitted briefly after her breakdown years ago. It took some convincing, but eventually a retired nurse, now working part-time at reception, recognized her. The woman's voice dropped to a whisper when she heard Lauren's name. She used to talk about the school a lot, the nurse said. Said she made a mistake, put a child somewhere they never belonged. Said the child would come back to fix it. What did she mean by that? Mrs. Callahan asked, her voice barely audible. The nurse hesitated. She said the boy wasn't real, that he was built from paperwork, that someone designed his whole identity from scratch, like a ghost child created on paper to fill a role. Mrs. Callahan felt a chill go down her spine. Did she say who created him? The nurse nodded slowly. She said it was Edward Green. Said he came back from the dead. It was too much. Mason wasn't just a neglected child or an orphan lost in the system. He was something else entirely, someone engineered, placed, woven into her life with purpose.
But why?
And what was the role he was meant to fill? And then, just as she was piecing together the horrifying implications, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video file, sent from a blocked number. Hands shaking, she tapped to open it. The footage was grainy and dim, like it was recorded through a hallway security camera. It showed a figure walking down the corridor at her school. The timestamp was from 3 days earlier. The person wore a coat, long, beige, familiar. Too familiar. As the figure turned to face the camera, her breath caught in her throat. It was her. She was walking through the school, in the middle of the night. Alone. Carrying the torn book. And she had no memory of it. The next morning came far too quickly, though sleep had hardly touched Mrs. Callahan at all. The images from the video still burned behind her eyes. Herself, walking alone through the school hallways in the dead of night, holding the torn book like it was some kind of relic. Her first instinct had been to believe the footage was fake, maybe even AI-generated, but deep down, she couldn't shake the gnawing sense that it was her. She just had no memory of it. She sat at her kitchen table in the dark, eyes fixed on the book now lying unopened in front of her, the slip of paper with Edward Green's eerie handwriting still nestled between the pages. The house was silent. The only sound was the occasional creak of wood, as if it too was trying to whisper something she didn't want to hear. Then, her phone lit up again, this time with a number she recognized. It was David, her late husband's best friend, and the school's retired facilities director, someone she hadn't spoken to in nearly a year. He'd vanished from her life after her husband died in a hiking accident, but now, for some reason, he was calling. "Clara," his voice rasped the moment she picked up. "They're watching you. You need to stop looking." Her heart dropped. "What are you talking about? Who's watching me? I shouldn't be saying this. I kept quiet when your husband was asking questions. I thought they'd leave us alone after what happened. But then you opened that book, didn't you? You started following the trail." He sounded panicked, his voice cracking like a man drowning in guilt. "Mason wasn't supposed to be in your class. That wasn't random." Mrs. Callahan froze. "You know about Mason? Why wasn't I told?" "Because there are people in the district who made sure his placement bypassed the normal systems. They rerouted his paperwork through a shadow file, a ghost protocol used back in 2003 when Edward Green was still on payroll. Mason's file was built using an old template. There's no birth certificate, no custody trace, nothing legal. It's all fake. Clara, he doesn't officially exist." Her mouth went dry. "So, what is he? Why was he sent to me?" "That's the part one can't answer," David said, lowering his voice. "But I think it has something to do with your husband. Before he died, he was looking into a closed adoption case from years ago. Said he thought the kid was placed in the wrong home, that someone tampered with the records. I told him to drop it. Then he went on that hiking trip alone." Mrs. Callahan's vision blurred as her thoughts raced. Her husband had never been one to take spontaneous trips. In fact, she remembered clearly they'd argued about it. He said he needed space, time to clear his head. But she now realized it had been more than that. He was hunting the same truth she was now stumbling upon, and it had cost him his life. And suddenly, everything became heavier, every unanswered question more suffocating. Her husband had died chasing the shadows she was now walking straight into. Then came the knock at her door. Not a gentle tap, 3 deliberate pounds that made her jump. She approached cautiously and opened it to find someone she never expected. Lauren. She looked thin, disheveled, and nervous. "We don't have much time," she whispered, stepping inside without being asked. "They know I contacted you. They tapped my phone. I've been living off-grid for the last 6 months." Her eyes were wild, darting around the house. "I'm only here because I owe you the truth. You always try to protect those kids, Clara. You deserve to know." Mrs. Callahan locked the door behind her. "Why was Mason created? What's the purpose?" Lauren sat, pulling a crumpled file from her coat. It started as an experiment, a behavioral study under the guise of a state-run program. They created children on paper, names, birthdays, medical histories, foster placements, all fabricated, inserted into the system to test compliance, empathy, teacher responses, even parental instincts. Mason is the last one. The only one who made it far enough to raise red flags. They placed him in a controlled district, one with high success ratings and low incident reports. "Your school." Mrs. Callahan shook her head, struggling to comprehend the horror. "You helped them?" "I didn't know what I was helping with, not at first," Lauren said, voice cracking. "But when I figured it out, I tried to blow the whistle. That's when they discredited me, called me unstable. I barely escaped. But I left one clue behind, in the torn book. I figured if the right person ever found it, they'd know something was wrong." Mrs. Callahan stared at her, torn between rage and sorrow. Everything she believed about her job, her students, her husband's death. It had all been manipulated. But the worst part was that now she had to decide, stay quiet to keep herself safe, or expose the truth and risk becoming the next person to vanish. Lauren must have seen the war in her eyes, because she reached across the table and said, "They'll come after you, Clara. But if you're brave enough to finish what your husband started, we can stop this." Mrs. Callahan's mind raced. She thought of Mason, his quiet sadness, his unexplained bruises, the way he flinched when adults raised their voices. He wasn't just part of some research study. He was a real boy with real pain. And if no one protected him, who would? Just as she opened her mouth to respond, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a live video feed streaming from inside her classroom. Someone was in there, alone, at her desk. The camera zoomed in slowly, and she saw what was lying on the table. It was Mason's backpack. And next to it, a note written in thick black marker. "Choose him or the truth." Mrs. Callahan's hands trembled as she watched the grainy live stream of her own classroom, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might collapse under the weight of what that single sentence meant. Choose him or the truth. Mason's backpack sat there like a symbol, no, a threat, at the center of the screen, an object so ordinary it became terrifying. And whoever had sent the feed knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't just about scaring her anymore. It was about testing her resolve, twisting the knife of guilt until she either backed off or broke completely. She could hear Lauren breathing hard across the table, her body tensing as the seconds dragged out, but Mrs. Callahan didn't look away from the screen. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to grab her keys, drive to the school, and protect that boy. But deep down, something darker stirred. What if that's exactly what they wanted her to do? She snatched the phone and killed the feed, standing abruptly. "How many people knew about this?" she asked, her voice low and shaking but growing sharper by the second. Lauren looked up at her, eyes wet, lips pressed tight. "Tell me the truth."
Now.
Lauren hesitated. "I only knew a few names, Clara. A couple of research coordinators, 2 state-level advisors. But there was always someone pulling the strings. The one who kept signing off on the funding, who authorized the placements even after internal reports flagged the program." "And who was that?" Mrs. Callahan demanded. Lauren looked up, the answer clearly breaking her. "Principal Raymond." The name hit her like a slap. Raymond had been her colleague, her friend, her boss for nearly a decade. He was the one who supported her through her husband's funeral, who wrote her glowing evaluations, who laughed with her in the break room while sharing stories about his grandkids. He had even told her he trusted her with the most vulnerable kids because of her compassion. And now all of it, every gesture, every word, contaminated by this revelation. "No," she said aloud, shaking her head. "No, I would have seen it. I would have known." But she didn't. She hadn't. And that was the most terrifying part. All this time, she had been looking out there for the threat, searching through dusty files, cryptic notes, distant memories, while the rot had been rooted deep inside the one person who always claimed to protect the school. She turned to Lauren. "Why now? Why would Raymond escalate like this?" Lauren spoke quickly. "Because they know they're running out of time. After your husband started pulling threads, a few senators caught wind of the program. Funding got frozen, and files were ordered to be purged. But the data still exists, Clara. Your husband made sure of it. He backed it up somewhere encrypted. And they think you might know where it is. That's why Mason was placed in your class. He wasn't just a behavioral case. He's bait. Emotional leverage." The full weight of the betrayal settled into her chest like cement. Mason, that quiet, nervous boy, was being used like a pawn in a game he didn't even understand. Her husband had died to protect children like him, and now she was the last wall between exposing the truth or letting this nightmare disappear forever. The panic inside her threatened to boil over, but she forced herself to think clearly. "I need to talk to Raymond," she said. "Face to face. Alone." Lauren grabbed her wrist. "Clara, no. If you walk in there without proof, without leverage, you won't walk out. You don't know how deep this goes." She didn't flinch. Then I'll take him by surprise. I've got something he doesn't know I have. She reached down and grabbed the torn book from the table, flipping to the page where the second note had been hidden. Behind the paper scrap, just beneath the torn binding, something shimmered faintly. She pulled it out. It was a micro SD card, nearly invisible. My husband wasn't stupid, she muttered. If he knew he was being hunted, he would have hidden the truth somewhere only I would find it. Lauren stared in disbelief. That could be the evidence, the full reports, identities, signatures, even payroll trails. But we won't know unless we decrypt it, which means we need someone we trust. That's when another name hit her like a whisper from the past: Eli, her late husband's brother. A cybersecurity analyst who'd burned bridges with the family after accusing the school board of financial fraud years ago. Nobody had believed him then, but maybe, just maybe, he'd been closer to the truth than anyone realized. Without hesitation, she dialed his number. When he picked up, his voice was wary. "Clara? After all these years." "I need your help," she said, her voice cracking with urgency. "I have something Mason died for. I think my husband was murdered. And if I don't expose it, a little boy is going to vanish next." There was a pause on the other end. Then, finally, Eli said, "Send me everything. I'll make sure it doesn't disappear." As she ended the call, her phone buzzed again. A new message. It was a photo of Mason. He was sitting in the school cafeteria, alone, terrified, his hands tied behind his chair. And the message read, "1 hour. Truth dies with him." The final moments leading up to Clara's confrontation felt like walking a tightrope over fire. The air was thick with urgency as she approached the school's rear entrance, just past dusk, her heart pounding like a war drum. Eli had texted minutes earlier. The files were decrypted, confirmed authentic, and damning. Government names, school administrators, falsified psychiatric evaluations, placement strategies, and payment logs all linked to an experimental behavior program disguised as a special support initiative. It had all been buried in offshore servers and scrubbed from official reports. And at the center of it, Principal Raymond's signature appeared over and over again. Clara clutched the flash drive tightly in her fist, the digital weight of justice humming quietly inside. But her focus wasn't just on evidence anymore. It was on Mason. The photo of him bound to the cafeteria chair kept playing over in her head like a broken record. She wouldn't let him be the final sacrifice. She slipped in through the janitor's entrance, winding through the dark, echoing hallways that now felt hostile and unfamiliar. The silence was disorienting. No school should feel this still. Every creak of the floor sounded like a scream. When she reached the cafeteria doors, they were already cracked open. A single light flickered inside. She pushed through slowly, praying it wasn't too late, and that's when she saw him. Mason sat in the same chair from the photo, rope loosely looped around his wrists, more symbolic than secure. He was conscious, eyes wide and red, clearly terrified but unhurt. And standing just feet away from him, completely calm, was Raymond. "Clara," he said gently, like they were about to start a parent-teacher conference. "You shouldn't have come." The sight of him in that moment, his usual warm demeanor now dripping with control and menace, unraveled everything she had known about him. "Let him go," she snapped, stepping forward. "You're not going to touch him." Raymond gave a faint smile and held up his hands. "I already told you. He's not the target. You are. He's just how I got you here. You used him like a pawn, like all the others. And yet here you are," Raymond said, circling the table slowly. "You think you've got some kind of upper hand? What, because you found the drive? I'm not the only name on it, Clara. There are powerful people involved. Senators. Military contractors. Do you honestly believe you can blow the whistle without paying a price?" "I'm not here to play defense," she replied, her voice tightening. "I came to end this." From her coat pocket, she pulled out a tiny device, a portable hotspot, already connected and uploading the decrypted files to a hidden live stream link. She had learned her lesson from the hidden camera earlier. Eyes were protection. Truth needed an audience. And this time, people were watching. Thousands. Raymond's face fell as he caught the red glow of the upload status on her phone. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice turning icy. "I told the truth," she answered. "And now everyone else will hear it too." He lunged. It wasn't fast or dramatic. It was desperate. Clara sidestepped him, her adrenaline giving her strength she didn't know she had, and shoved him into the table. Chairs clattered to the ground. Mason let out a startled cry. Raymond scrambled, trying to grab the phone, but Clara already had it tucked back in her pocket as she grabbed a heavy metal pitcher from the snack bar and raised it in defense. "Don't," she warned. Raymond looked up, breathing hard. "They're going to come for you," he said through clenched teeth. "They're going to erase this like they've erased everything else. You think a flash drive and a story is going to stop them?" "No," she said. "But it's going to start something they can't control." In the distance, sirens wailed, closer now. Lauren had tipped the press, and Eli had mirrored the files to 3 major media outlets. The classroom wasn't just a crime scene anymore, it was a symbol, a viral eruption of betrayal, bravery, and truth. The story had already broken across trending feeds. Teacher exposes hidden child behavior program tied to state officials. People were watching. Whistleblowers were coming forward. The flood had begun. Raymond collapsed to his knees, not from pain, but from the realization that he had finally lost control. Clara ran to Mason, untying the ropes and pulling him into her arms. He clung to her without saying a word. The cafeteria lights flickered again as the front doors burst open and officers stormed inside. But just as she turned to face them, something strange caught her eye. A slip of paper, wedged into the torn cover of the book. The same one that had started it all. She pulled it free and unfolded it with trembling fingers. It wasn't from her husband. It wasn't even written in adult handwriting. It was from Mason. "If you're reading this, it means I wasn't brave enough to say it out loud. I saw something. In the basement. A room with cameras. And my name was on the wall. I think they were watching us for a long time. I think someone in the classroom knew. I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner." Her blood ran cold, because as the officers handcuffed Raymond and led him away, he looked back at her. Not angry, not scared, but almost relieved. And as she turned toward the sound of Mason's sobbing against her chest, another figure appeared in the hallway beyond the cafeteria door. A teacher's aide. Smiling. Watching. Unblinking. And in that moment, Clara realized the biggest lie of all. Raymond wasn't the only architect of the program. He may have been the face, but someone else had been inside her classroom the entire time, listening, waiting, adjusting the pieces. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. In the weeks that followed, the world outside Clara's school transformed into something unrecognizable. News outlets ran constant coverage of the scandal, the footage of her confrontation with Raymond going viral within hours of being uploaded. Hashtags like #ClassroomTruth, #WhistleblowerTeacher, and #SaveOurKids trended across platforms, bringing a tidal wave of public outrage. Parents across the country began demanding transparency in their children's schools, asking hard questions about what kind of behavioral programs their kids had been enrolled in without consent. Lawmakers scrambled to respond, with emergency hearings held in state legislatures and calls for federal investigations launched almost overnight. Clara was asked to testify, and though she was exhausted, emotionally battered, and still processing the betrayal she'd uncovered, she stood before a packed courtroom, voice steady as she recounted every terrifying detail. She wasn't just a teacher anymore. She was a symbol. Mason, meanwhile, was slowly healing. The boy who had once been quiet, overlooked, and seen as troubled, now had a community that believed in him. Clara visited him often, sometimes just sitting in silence, sometimes reading from the very book that started it all. They never threw it away, torn cover and all. It had become something sacred, proof that even the smallest, most forgotten object can carry a message powerful enough to shatter an empire. Therapy helped Mason unpack what he had seen and what he had written in that letter, and though there were still dark days, the nightmares had started to fade. Most importantly, he no longer felt alone. Clara made sure of that. The school district was turned inside out. Dozens of staff were dismissed or reassigned as investigators uncovered layers of hidden reports and financial trails that led to private contractors and unapproved testing. Raymond was officially charged with conspiracy, child endangerment, and data manipulation. But what chilled Clara the most was that he refused to testify about who else had been involved. His silence wasn't from defiance, it was from fear. That final look on his face had said it all. He wasn't the top of the food chain. He was just another piece that had finally fallen out of place. Clara took an extended leave from teaching. She needed time, not just to recover, but to understand how everything had spiraled so far without anyone speaking up. She poured herself into advocacy, writing essays and speaking at conferences, not out of ego, but because the silence that had once protected the program still lingered in other places. She was determined to break it. But even as the world shifted, one question remained unanswered, unresolved, gnawing at her every time she passed a mirror. Who else was in the room? The final clue had come unexpectedly. One evening, Clara received an unmarked envelope at her doorstep. No return address. Inside, a USB stick and a single typed sentence. You stopped the surface, but you never saw the roots. Against her better judgment, she plugged it in. The drive contained one video file. Surveillance footage, not from the school's official security system, but from an off-the-books feed. The footage showed her classroom, months before the incident. Children working quietly, unaware. And there, standing behind Clara's desk, flipping through her lesson plans while she was gone, was the teacher's aide. Calm, methodical, almost invisible. It made her skin crawl. The aide had vanished after the arrest. No digital trail. No tax records. No driver's license. Even the school's employment system showed no record of her hire. Clara submitted the footage to the FBI, but she already knew what the answer would be. They couldn't find anything. No matches. No leads. Whoever that woman was, she was either part of something far beyond a rogue school program or something entirely different. Clara wasn't sure which was worse. Still, she didn't let fear take over again. If she'd learned anything, it was that truth has to be louder than silence. She went back to her classroom eventually, not because she thought it was safe, but because she refused to abandon the children who still needed someone to protect them. She kept the torn book on her desk, now framed behind glass. Students would ask about it, and she'd tell them it reminded her that even something damaged can hold the truth inside. That even one voice, no matter how small, can tear down lies built by the powerful. But sometimes, late at night, she'd wake up and feel the weight of that sentence from the envelope pressing on her chest. You never saw the roots. She didn't know if she ever would. But now, the world was watching. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep the darkness from growing back. Or, at least, slow it down.